So I went down one day and I talked to them about what Law and Society research knew about what we call the mobilization of law, how people decide to use the law. And they said, oh, this was very interesting. Would I write them a review of the literature? They would pay me. Chambliss said, well, you see, you can make some money and do a little good at the same time. So at the end of the semester, I had 2 weeks to write this review. And I think it was important that I had only 2 weeks. And I piled in my office all the literature I could find on the mobilization of law and when people turn to law and why they do not. And because I had it all strewn across all the tables, had all these articles and books, and I had only 2 weeks to make sense of it, I started sorting it. I had to start somewhere. And I realized, it was truly a light bulb went off in my head. I realized that there was a problem in the literature. Whenever you looked at the survey research, because my first division was by discipline. I put all the political scientists here, I put all the anthropologists here, I put the I needed to start someplace. And I found that whenever it was a survey by a psychologist or a political scientist, they always reported that everybody loved the law. This was the literature on procedural justice, this was the literature on attitudes toward the courts and law, and everybody loved the law. This is in a 20-minute survey on the telephone. But then if I looked at the anthropologists who would live in communities in Illinois and Massachusetts and Georgia, they were writing all about how the people would resist legal authority, how they would find ways around the law, how they would take extra legal action. Donald Black would write about that. So I realized that we had a problem, that the way the research was done had determined the answer that they were getting. When you lived in the community, as these anthropologists did, they saw all sorts of behavior that was not reported in the surveys. But the problem was that the surveys were really random surveys of the population, and they could easily be generalized. But these ethnographies, well, we had one in Georgia and we had one in the community, you couldn't generalize from them. And so I called up the people in New Jersey and I said, well, you know, I could write you a review of the literature, but I got a better idea. I'll tell you how to do the research you want to do. What you have to do is you have to do an in-depth study that will be generalizable and have validity across the state. Then you might find a real answer. And they said, well, write us a proposal. So I did. And they put it in for funding, and they got funding, and then it fell apart. And my name was on it. And I got very upset, and I had to give up the research that I was doing at the time, which is on how children study law. I wrote only one paper. I had to give it up, and I felt my name was on this, and so I had to go down to New Jersey all the time and do this research. And Patty, I got to put Patty on the grant, and we spent a lot of time in the Newark airport and on the highway. And so what was the design? The design was to get people to talk to us for hours, not just 20 minutes. We couldn't live with them as the anthropologists had done, but we had to have long conversations, not just asking, were you ever stopped by the police, and what happened, and were you ever in court, and did you like the judge? And so that's what we did. And we ended up interviewing these people. We didn't do all 400 interviews ourselves. We did about 100 of them ourselves. And then we trained other people. We trained some students at Princeton, some at some of the state colleges, and we hired an African-American company to do the interviews in heavily African-American zip codes, and we had 2 Spanish-speaking interviewers who worked in the heavily Spanish neighborhoods. We couldn't tell ahead of time what the people were, so we did by zip code. Okay? And so what did we ask them about? Well, we didn't want to ask them about the law, because then they would just give us one of these routine answers. We We wanted to find the law in their lives. And so we never asked about the law. We asked them about their lives. And we started the interview by saying, how long have you lived here? What do you like about this neighborhood? What don't you like about this neighborhood? How will you like your neighbors? How will you not like your neighbors? And these 4 questions turn out to be some of the most important. And I urge you, if you do interviewing with people about anything, to ask these kinds of questions, because it gives people the opportunity to define themselves for you, to make distinctions. They can be moral distinctions, they can be political, they can be all kinds. So I remember one woman who lived in a very wealthy suburb of Newark, and I was interviewing her, and I said, so how will you like your neighbors? Or how will you not like? I can't remember which one went first. She said, well, can't you tell? I said, no. She said, don't you see I have an RV in my driveway? They don't like that. I inherited this house. I can't afford to live here. And the way I live, they don't like. So immediately, we've got class resentment here. We have all kinds of, she recognizes that her neighbors don't like her, that she's not quite like them. And by the end of this interview, which was primarily, she started talking about her son and his special education needs, she told a magnificent story about how she finally got help for her son to make an application for college by sitting in the guidance counselor's office, because the guidance counselor wasn't helping her son, he wasn't helping her. And she said, and I learned that from these neighbors. You know, they do everything for their children. So I got all dressed up one day, and I went in there, and I said, I'm sitting here until you help me. So that's a very interesting story. And that becomes a story that we use to talk about the ways in which people get around bureaucratic rules. So what did we ask people about after we said, how are you the same, are you different? We asked them 99 different questions about, did this ever happen to you? Have you ever been bothered by noise by the neighbors? Have you ever been bothered by children fighting? Do you have parking problems? And we had a list that went from the neighborhood to shopping, to property issues, to school issues, medical issues, family issues, government issues. 99 different probes. And if they said to us, oh yeah, that happens, then we'd stop and have a conversation. Say, well, tell me about it. What happened last time that happened? What did you do? What did you think about it? Well, could you have done anything else? Do you know anybody else this happens to? And so we collected a series of stories about what happens to people in their lives and what they do about it. In our analysis of reading all these transcripts, coding them, and aggregating all this data, we were looking for the moments when they took something like parking in front of the house and turned it into a legal problem. Some people in some neighborhoods got together and went down to town hall and said they have a parking problem, they want a sign on the street, they want a yellow line. Other people do nothing. In our analysis, we care about how they distinguish when it is time for law and when it is not. And so in the end, we collected over 5,000 stories of incidents, over 5,000 incidents. And these incidents we could organize into what turned out to be 3 stories of law. One story we call Before the Law, invoking Kafka's story. In this story, people describe the law as fair, disinterested set of rules which you invoke when things matter beyond yourself. It has to be something which is relevant to other people, not simply to you. And I'll give you an example. A woman I interviewed in the same affluent neighborhood described to me how you should be self-reliant, you shouldn't sue people, that when she was a child, she was hit by a car, and she even still has problems with her leg, but her father wouldn't sue anybody because you just got to take care of yourself. Later on in the interview, it came out she had litigation going against the supermarket. I said, well, tell me about that. I'm sort of interested. And she said, well, you know, there was this banana on the floor. And